Dear friends, welcome to the continuing discussion on the subject of reporting, editing and production for print journalism. In the previous lectures, we have learnt about the function of reporting and the role of the news desk in giving shape to the written material. Now we go into the working of the news desk itself. The editing desk. Journalism and the world of media have a tendency to emphasize the reportorial function because it is the reporter that the public sees. On the contrary, the role of an editor or a copy editor or a sub-editor, as he may be called, is an anonymous one. It is virtually unknown to the public. A writer does not exist whose work cannot be improved by the constructive vigilance of an editor or a sub-editor who is well versed in what is being written about, an expert in language, and a flexible and tolerant person capable of appreciating value in the work of others. And in simple terms, the general principles of editing are to prepare, to supervise, to direct and to rearrange the given material so as to make it fit for publication, that is the ultimate public consumption. So, the role of the sub-editor is to understand what is meant to be said by the reporter or the writer, to simplify it so that others can understand it, to rewrite it so that its meaning is not changed, and to localize it so that the context is kept intact for the readers belonging to different regions of the publication. The input or the reports are received at one place in the newspaper office called the newsroom. They come from various sources from the world over, whereas the space available for displaying such material is obviously always limited because the number of pages in the publication shall always be limited. Therefore, it is important to cut down on quantity to retain quality. Selective cutting and joining of sentences and phrases is resorted to with the intention of making the text flow smoothly, making it more readable. So, the general requirements of editing are assessing importance of the material received, that is the input report, fixing its length to either cut or add material to it, removing mistakes of fact and language, ascertain liability, that is the responsibility of the source and the writer, ensure objectivity and legal clarity of the contents, decide on its length and eventual display in the publication, break or make sentences, give a headline, and finally give instructions to the technical production team for its eventual printing part in the newspaper or the magazine. The style or procedure of editing and language are always different from product to product, that is publication to publication, depending upon its readership, reach and objective. It is important for the sub-editor to realize beforehand such a requirement or limitation as the case may be. So, a sub-editor must know the following in order to be best equipped to do his job, that is language and grammar, production technique, that is typography in case of print, facts and law that govern the publication in that territory, the publication's intent, reach and readership, and finally local, regional and national affairs in that area so that the context is always kept right. For these requirements, the sub-editor must be a well-read, inquisitive, aware and patient individual. He is also supposed to be a public person with an opinion and analytical ability of his own so that he can perform the role of an opinion leader in the news desk. The text item that is written by a reporter is known as a report, or the input as we have been calling it. If it is meant to be used and therefore submitted and or accepted by the news desk, it becomes copy. Copy is a purely technical word in the media industry given to any report that is submitted for publication. So the two terms report and copy mean different things. Copy is an industry term understood universally to mean one and the same thing in all media houses, and for outsiders and the uninitiated it may mean a report that has been filed by somebody. So the position of the sub-editor is very often renamed as a copy editor in many media organizations in different countries. So let us now come to the role and importance of a sub-editor. In modern perspective, when there is a management technique for everything, so even the newsroom editors are made to feel and work like news managers. It must be admitted that a great deal of copy editing is actually copy management. An edited hard copy with the marks on it indicating where the paragraph is to begin, the capital letters, the connection lines, a properly written headline, the grammatical or spelling corrections, they can look pretty impressive even if there is little improvement in terms of language. Or in computer editing, the uniformity of fonts and type size, spacing, indentation, space adjustment, etc. can give the copy the looks of a very properly fixed copy. But the truth of such editing, where only superficial neatness is introduced, is found out much before you think. A good sub-editor knows that the editing craft demands responsibility more than style. Neatness has its own virtue, but a mistake amidst neatness is doubly noticeable and therefore unpardonable. The real issue is to understand the story and its import and to tell it the way it happened. The sub-editor must try to put together a clear and comprehensive story from the available material that may be at times confusing, contradictory, unclear, and quite often misleading. And all this has to be done within a deadline that cannot be extended. It is often seen that sub-editors work for the sake of completing all the work in a shift, rather than for the interest and benefit of the reader. In some newspapers and magazines, there is a tendency to make a layout as if to win an award every day, or to shock and surprise the reader. However, the intention should be to help the reader navigate through the publication and understand what is going on in the newspaper. The reader is the actual and the real customer of the newspaper, and even the advertiser prefers a newspaper because of its readers. The reader ranges from the virtually illiterate person or a neo-literate person to a laureate or someone with extremely excellent qualities of reading and writing ability. There is little point in aiming to meet the requirement of the average reader, because writing what an average reader understands means making things difficult for the below average readers, and that means almost half of all the readers. The newspapers generally are meant for the masses, and they must cater to the needs of the masses. If most readers fail to understand the news as they appear, the basic purpose of the newspapers would be lost. It is therefore the responsibility of a sub-editor to ensure that this does not happen, and this is not the case. So the role of a sub-editor is to keep in mind the requirement and constraints of the reader and the management of the newspaper organization on the other hand. The best way is to combine the two roles. There often might be a situation when the reader does not necessarily want what the newspaper management wants them to read, and vice versa. The management perhaps does not want to give the readers what they would want to read. So, what is the reader requirement in terms of text in a journal? It comprises facts, short, simple, proximity, interesting, visual support, and catchy headline. Ensuring that readers get what they want is the primary job of the sub-editor. To take care of what the organization or the newspaper management wants, a sub-editor must keep abreast of the newspaper's style or policy and stick to it. On the face of it, all this may look quite simple and commonplace, but good sub-editors, right since the advent of modern journalism, have been rare to find. So, what is editing all about? As a process, editing involves the following steps. Number 1, collection of facts, figures and examples at one place and their sources. Number 2, classification of the available inputs in categories in chronological order or in a certain order. It is true for news because news can fall in different categories, and for other kinds of non-news writing, this categorization may be different. Number 3, checking the inputs for errors of fact. Number 4, checking the inputs for errors of language. Number 5, adding relevant information to ensure continuity. Number 6, fixing the length or the size of the input according to available space. Number 7, removing the bits of repetitive information and adding the disjointed ends. Number 8, giving a headline to the final compiled work. Number 9, giving a display to the item thus prepared according to its priority if it is news. Number 10, readjusting this priority after comparison with other items or during the course of time. And lastly, designing the page with the edited items put in different places and placing them in a fashion that appeals to the viewer or the reader. So, if you go through this agenda, it might seem a very daunting task, but remember that sub-editors and copy editors in newspapers, magazines and TV news channels accomplish all this in case of more than one item in a matter of a shift lasting generally for 6 to 8 hours. And in case of every item, the same level of clarity, objectivity and rationality is ensured and has to be maintained. It is for no ordinary reason, therefore, that sub-editors are regarded as critics or cranky husbands in their households and in their circle of friends as well. They are forever finding faults with the available piece of work which is in front of them. It becomes second nature for them to look for mistakes and suggest how to remove it. So, what does it require to be a good sub-editor? As the list indicates, a good sub-editor must have a good grasp of the language and especially the local dialect, have a fairly good, at least above average knowledge of current affairs, geography, history, local personalities and the system of governance and social requirements of that area. Have a style of working in linear fashion so that work gets completed as time passes. Have the ability to work under pressure of time and space. Have a good sense of proportion and display. Be good in expression and have a healthy and unbiased interest in everything, and that includes everything, including subjects which the sub-editor does not like. He must be able to switch from one style to another at quick intervals without losing control or without appearing jumpy. Must have the patience and respect for other people's work and should not feel cramped at not being given the same regard or space as the reporter, because it is to be remembered that most often the sub-editor's work and contribution goes unsung but not unrewarded. So the step to be followed after this is copy testing. This means taking a decision on the usefulness of a given item. This stage of copy testing is reached when items have been received from different sources on the news desk. They have been sorted and sent to different directories as per the page. The schedule of use of such items as per the time available has been decided by the news desk or the in charge of the news desk, such as the news editor. The level of treatment as per the source has been decided, and the level of treatment as per other factors, that is time, importance, space, content and reach, also has been decided. So after all this has been decided, copy testing will happen. So what is the need now? The need is to check all copy kept in different directories on some basic parameters. What are these basic parameters on which copy is tested? This is news value, libel or defamation, slant, color and advertising interest. What is news value? The time tested factors of what, when, where, who, why and how are to be applied both by a reporter and a sub-editor. In news especially, this is the one factor that makes or mars the reporter's hard work. Libel or defamation. It is a deliberate or intentional content to damage the reputation of an individual or an organization. What is slant? Slant is misinformation to favor a particular viewpoint, such as a sentence which says, quote, the incidence of malaria is increasing because the drug XXYY is not being used. Here, it could be the intention of the writer and the reporter to make it look like news, but there is slant in this news and there is misinformation to promote a particular viewpoint or a particular product. Color. What is color? Color is the intention and the practice to use language so as to make it appear different from what it actually is. For example, a sentence which says, quote, hundreds of devout Hindus today heard in rapt attention a speech calling for a march to Ayodhya. Now, where is the color in it? The color is to make the whole thing appear as if this is what was happening. The color is to give you glasses of a certain color so that you view things through that color: red, green, blue, saffron, white and so on. Advertising copy. Any matter that is in the nature of the publicity of a commercial item, product or a company or organization or activity is advertisement matter. Items that praise or condemn one item or company over the other, items that make unnecessary reference to the brand names of a company or a product, items that lay undue stress on the merits of one brand, items which give information which is not essential in public interest but could be useful or helpful in attracting customers, and items that identify brands with a motive. All these items are said to contain advertising matter, and this is what needs to be tested and checked. How to check? Copy should be checked for containing advertising matter or matter of commercial interest by using extra caution whenever a mention is made of commercial names or identities, and it should be seen that the mention is not made without purpose. One must ensure equal space or frequency of occurrence to diverse names rather than using one name repeatedly, and avoiding the mention of brand names in case of a new venture, inauguration or accident, saying that accident happened because the vehicle was using this X brand of tires or engines or the body. All such items should be sent out of the news pages to special pages or ad supplements meant for carrying such items, because such items promoting a product do not have a space on news pages. So, after copy checking, we come to the issue of language and improving the language in news reports. We must acknowledge that English is not the natural or mother tongue of most Indians, but it is the most widely spoken and acceptable language, at least in urban areas. Still, not many Indians are familiar with the technicalities or niceties of the language. Many of us spend a lifetime believing a wrong pronunciation or the meaning of a word to be correct, whereas it is not. It is often said that a language is a dynamic entity. Its form and utility keep changing with time. But we, born and brought up in Hindi or our own regional language, believe this to be true for our own language but not for English. It is so common for many of us to come across literate or educated people use hilarious kinds of words in English, leave alone scandalous pronunciations. In view of this, and despite the fact that English is a foreign language adopted by us as our own, it is common for writers and reporters as well as sub-editors to commit and come across errors of language in their daily work. The reason behind such errors is mainly ignorance or lack of knowledge simply. Many of the reasons given earlier for committing errors of proper nouns or errors of fact, such as overconfidence, lethargy, shortage of time or space, or mistaken belief, may not be applicable in the case of errors of language. One cannot be overconfident or short of time about an error of knowledge, and one who complains like this is simply ignorant. The only way to correct and remove errors of language is to know the language thoroughly and keep updating one's knowledge about it regularly. It is important for us to know what kind of refinements have been introduced in the English language the world over, since our publication is a mirror of the world for our readers. Being politically correct in English usage, such a commonplace and taken for granted aspect of the language in the Western world, is almost non-existent in India. Our government, bureaucracy, and even the intelligentsia is blissfully ignorant of the fact that words like chairman, manning of operations, a social leper, blind, and so on are no longer used in any kind of publication in English speaking nations for their derogatory, gender, or other kinds of biases and connotations. But we in India merrily keep on using such terms in prestigious newspapers and magazines, irrespective of the fact that when we get an opportunity to work with visiting foreign journalists or writers, or we get a chance to work abroad, we end up making a laughing stock of ourselves. At that time, our claims of knowing English or having scored good marks in this language at school, college, or university level come to a naught. Similarly, despite speaking English since childhood in our homes, among fellow students and colleagues, most Indians do not have a confident control over usage of certain English words. I have seen senior English teachers, academicians, professionals, and internationally famous educated people who have been frequent foreign travelers using incorrect English words. This happens because we are unwilling to change the way we speak or understand the language, simply because we have been using it like this since childhood. An interesting aspect of this situation is that those Indians whose English is grammatically correct and who have the right pronunciation are very ill at ease in fluently speaking the language. Any handbook about editing cannot substitute for a good English language grammar book or a competent style sheet of a renowned publication. Still, attempts can always be made to draw attention to some of the most commonly occurring mistakes in English usage, pronunciation, and spellings. In the course of their routine work, sub-editors have to use a number of terms that most people forgot after their last course in English composition, or maybe they never knew at all. In addition to knowing how to make a poor sentence better, a sub-editor has to be able to defend his or her decision to writers, editors, and fellow copy editors. That means, in a sense of speaking, being able to talk the talk. Correcting errors of language in itself requires a great deal of skill, but correctness is a secondary goal. It is part of a problem of communicating information to the reader. So, one need not sacrifice one to achieve the other. Points to remember are that writing for a mass medium must convey the meaning to an extremely diverse audience. It is vital to make the meaning clear at all levels of readership and input. For mass circulation and readership, the writing has to be readable as well as correct. Correct writing must never be pompous. Good writing requires that its correctness is inconspicuous. And on the other hand, readable and meaningful writing need not be incorrect. So, how do we go about it? By writing short and simple sentences, avoiding to adopt the style of write as you talk. The way we speak is most often not the right way to write. Looking for simple alternatives to difficult and complex words and phrases, one must remember that a simple alternative is always available. By breaking complicated sentences into shorter parts, writing in a meaningful manner and not showing off your phrases, and being sure of your spellings, not taking any chances as far as spellings are concerned. So, at this point, a brief mention about the usefulness of being bilingual must also be made. Transition from one language to the other is vital for all mass media and its related branches. In India, knowing English is as important as knowing the regional language in different parts of India. For instance, if one is working for an English language publication in, say, Gujarat, it is absolutely essential to know Gujarati and, of course, English. The same thing applies for Hindi and English in states like UP, Bihar, Rajasthan, and other Hindi-speaking states. Therefore, it is important to know Bangla and English in Bengal, Marathi and English in Maharashtra, and so on for other states. For those beginning to work in an English language publication, the common mistakes pertain to the noun-verb linkage, the distortion of verb in case of multiple sentences, the singular and plural usage, the direct and indirect speech, the use of adjectives, and the shades of difference in similar sounding words such as afraid, scared, and fearful. They mean the same thing if translated in Hindi, or happy, merry, and glad could mean the same thing in Hindi, but their use is different in case of English. So, the few things that need to be remembered always while using English are the tense. Past, present, and future are three different tenses and should not be used in the same breath in one sentence or in the same paragraph. We often see he said in one sentence and says he in the same sentence, in the same paragraph, or in the same sentence itself. The direct and indirect speech. The direct and indirect speeches are two distinct, grammatically correct situations which are not dependent to be used on our whims and fancies. We have to convert the present tense quotes in a direct sentence to past tense if and when the sentence is changed into an indirect one. The third thing to be remembered is giving the pause. The use of comma, semicolon, and colon, for example, is governed by certain basic rules. No one will object if a comma is used in the place of a colon, and even the meaning may not change, but it will be a grammatically incorrect situation reflecting poorly on the language standard of a publication. So, the use of prepositions and conjunctions. The use of small, insignificant words such as in, on, at, of, for is always governed by a set of rules. So, at is appropriate only if used in a certain situation where in will not do. But we, basically thinking in our mother languages and working in English, infer the simplest definition to be correct and use almost all prepositions as synonyms. The same is true for conjunctions as well. The next is the use of verbs. There are things like a transitive and intransitive verb, and their usage is also not dependent on the way we like it. A transitive verb cannot be used in the place of an intransitive verb and vice versa. A common example is writing he told without mentioning a subject after it. The use of adjectives. We Indians never tire of using too many adjectives, one after the other, one superseding the other or exceeding in using superlatives. Thus, it is common to come across phrases like more, better, or blunder mistake in spoken or written English. Nouns and pronouns. It is very common among Indians to refer to themselves in plural as we. This reflects in the writing of many reporters and writers too. especially when the intention is to show that the reported matter is not the writer's observation alone. Similarly, in the case of proper nouns, Indians generally never stick to a rule. Since the usage of honorary titles is very common in India, it is equally common to see such proper nouns being used with abandon in news or feature writing, often confusing the reader. Examples are the use of phrases like Chaudhary Sahab, Lalaji, Panditji, Maulana, Sardar, and so on. Use of slang. As English becomes a common man's language, the use of slang from British or American English usage is also becoming common in India, besides the development of a healthy slang of Indian English itself. As this growth continues unabated and is actually accelerated by the proliferation of TV channels, newer and newer words are being added to Indian English. Insisting on the purity of language in such a situation is undoubtedly foolhardy, but still some semblance of sanity has to be maintained. Newspapers traditionally have been symbols of this linguistic sanity, and in future also they will continue to be so. Therefore, newspaper writing and editing should strive at retaining the traditional straightforwardness of language, simply because some things do not change and should not change. The use of the vernacular. Again, as the use of English spreads in India, it is becoming common for English newspapers to use the vernacular words, sentences, or even complete paragraphs simply in an italicized alphabet. Although no one minds reading a little bit of the vernacular in an English publication, as it adds the required amount of authenticity and zest to the expression, using chunks of it is taking things a little bit too far. In other words, using vernacular to a great extent is like admitting the lack of ingenuity by the writer, because instead of recreating the expression in his language, that is the English, he prefers simply to carry the original, displaying a poor lack of writing skill. And lastly, the use of articles. The use of articles such as the good old poor a, an, and the has been an extreme casualty in English writing in India. Most writers believe that these articles are useless additions to the English language and anyone can do without them without making a difference to the meaning of the sentence. Although, in terms of honorific titles, use of the is more a matter of style, this particular article is perhaps the most grossly misused word in Indian English writing. Reporters and writers either use too much of it or too less, and more often than not, it is used at the wrong place. For correct and proper use of these articles, it is again suggested to consult and memorize a good grammar lesson rather than ask the adjacent sub-editor or the smart aleck in the office. We must remember that it is not an embarrassment to admit and acknowledge that English is not our language, but we have adopted it as our own. Therefore, the rules of Queen's English shall always apply, like it or not. Language is a dynamic entity. Therefore, certain aspects of the conservative English have to be abandoned to be replaced by more dynamic, appropriate, and useful aspects. No one should claim that he or she knows the last word about English usage. One who can make some claim, like this is the one who keeps consulting the dictionary and thesaurus very often and keeps abreast of what is happening in the field of English writing and English journalism around the world. In other words, one who keeps solving the difficult crossword puzzles almost daily is a good bet to ask in case of a doubt. The rules of grammar, pronunciation and usage have not changed. What has changed is our perception of things and language around us. There are many words which have formed part of the English vocabulary, whereas there are many which are not used because of being inappropriate, politically incorrect or inadequately expressive. So, after this brief recourse to the use of English language, we now move on to the topic of maintaining continuity in news reports, which is an essential part of copy editing on a news desk. What is continuity? In a newspaper, the inflow of information is continuous and very often uninterrupted. If the men and machines are working all right, a newspaper or news publication keeps getting information which may or may not be used as news is another matter, but this information is received round the clock. But the publication is bound by a deadline, whether it's a daily or a weekly. This would mean that all the information which is being received in the newsroom has to be constantly updated as later versions keep coming in. As the deadline of finalizing the publication approaches, it is vital that all the information received at different intervals is woven into one comprehensive matter, written or rewritten in a manner that the continuity of information is maintained in chronological order, that is. It sounds so simple, but it is actually a technical exercise which forms the very essence of editing. What we take for granted while reading a newspaper report, for example, has been incorporated in the text by one or more alert sub-editors at different levels and stages of time. An example, an elaborate example, will clarify this exercise more clearly. Suppose a train accident takes place at 7 in the morning, that is 7 a.m. The reports sent in by the agencies or the reporter at the spot of the accident will be of the following nature. Number 1, the first flash of the accident carrying only a 2-sentence message at say 7:30 a.m. or 8 a.m. simply informing the newsroom that a mishap has taken place. The first report carrying the early, very often sketchy bits of information with bare minimum details will land a little later, say at 8:30 a.m. The second, third or next parts of the report carrying more but slightly disjointed details in the nature of standalone pieces of information rather than comprehensive reports will keep coming in from say 8:30 to about 9 a.m. Then a little later, an overall lead superseding the earlier reports, that is the flash and the first report, giving a coherent account and description but quoting very few people, perhaps none from the site itself, is supposed to land at around 10 a.m. A little later, a second lead, more comprehensive, quoting the authorities who have reached the site as well as the headquarters of the railways a little far away, with more reliable facts and figures, may land at 12 noon. This second lead, incidentally, may be the final copy for those publications which are released in the afternoon or early in the evening, the eveningers as we call them. A couple of hours later, say at 2 o'clock, a third lead will be issued carrying the basic details from the second lead, but with more additional information from authorities and eyewitnesses, and this may arrive in several parts and may be named as the afternoon lead. Then there will be a fourth lead, also named perhaps the evening lead, written with the early evening editions in mind, carrying all the available reports till that time, that is around 5 p.m. At around 7 in the evening, an overall lead, tightly written with more crisp text and to the point quotations, will be received in the evening. This might be the final copy for early night editions which are released at 8 o'clock. Then there will be a night lead by 9 p.m. meant as perhaps the final report for the event, and which might not be superseded for the rest of the day. Side by side with all these lead stories, there will be several side stories, eyewitnesses accounts, official interviews, a chronology of events, a history of accidents, analysis of reasons, reactions, and so on will also be landing at regular intervals. Now consider this. Suppose your newspaper is to be released at 11 p.m. The sub-editor coming on duty at 5 p.m. will either find everything kept in the right baskets or directories for him from the flash to the evening lead, or it could be a sorted pile with only the latest reports and side stories to be dealt with, and the earlier reports would have been discarded. The possibilities of the second option happening are lesser because the early duty sub-editor will most probably keep everything in the anticipation that probably the evening sub-editor will make his own decision and might complain if the earlier reports are discarded. So, in this situation, what awaits the evening sub-editor will be single sentence flash reports coming as early as 7:30 in the morning, to the early lead, to the afternoon lead, to the overall lead, with several other stories. Chances are that a similar set of stories will be waiting for him from the other agencies and other sources as well, and perhaps from the newspaper's own correspondents also. So, introducing continuity is the exercise by which all similar stories are linked to give shape to one comprehensive report, and through which snatches on one line information are taken from early reports to fill in the gaps in the later reports. It is basically a sorting and tallying kind of an exercise, much like reconciling the account books. You simply ensure that the essence of what has been discarded is retained in some form, and that all the earlier reports are taken care of in the later versions in the chronological order, so that nothing of importance is missed regardless of the time when it was received at the news desk. So, this continuity can be ensured in two ways. Number one, by retaining the original sentences from earlier reports and joining them together by removing common phrases, common and proper nouns, and introducing conjunctions to join those disjointed bits of sentences. And number two, by discarding everything and writing afresh a sentence or even a paragraph containing all the available information reproduced in one's own language, and giving joint credit for the information to all the sources which have given the inputs. Although the second option is largely favored everywhere now, it is actually a combination of these two options which is the ideal answer to the problem. In this manner, what the sub-editor does is A. Assimilate the entire story, and B. Write a comprehensive report using the body text from the available material and introducing original sentences, phrases and expressions to ensure a smoother flow of the narrative. This requires an alert application of mind, concentration and simultaneous exercise of forming sentences, writing them when the need arises to join the matter which is already available. It is one exercise which, if done carefully and properly, gives a distinct identity to the final edited report, which makes all the difference to the reader. This report will demand least effort from the reader in comprehending and understanding the content and the sequence of events, and this is what editing should be all about. Clarity and maintaining of chronological order are the two main features of a good continuity exercise. The final product in this case automatically takes on such dimensions that any subsequent events or bits of information can be joined to it almost effortlessly. This report also acts as a ready base for all other subsequent additions on some inside page or the early pages. It can go inside as a complete report in itself, where it can be used as an independent item with a cross reference in the later, most probably the front page report. So, ensuring continuity is something which we also do in our day-to-day activities when conveying information or completing a task which involves many people. What matters most is the important bits should be taken out from different parts and put in a proper sequence, so that one thing can easily lead to another and onwards to the desirable conclusion. This flow of the task is what is required in editing exercises as well. For joining different bits of items, phrases like meanwhile, however, even as, in a related incident, etc. are also used to provide continuity and a connection between two related sentences or phrases. So, the points to be remembered in linking copies to ensure continuity are: number 1, avoid repeating of facts. Number 2, mention the full names or the full forms of people, places and other objects only once in the beginning, and in later occurrences the short form or the acronym can be given. Number 3, maintaining and ensuring a uniformity in spellings, names, occasions, dates and other statistics. Number 4, using rewriting tools or even conjunctions to provide links between descriptions which are related, or if not directly related, then pertaining to the same event or the same report. Often such stories might become long because of this joining and linking and taking bits and pieces of information from early stories as well. So, such stories need to be broken into smaller paragraphs. A paragraph, as we all know, is a structural part of a written text meant to give a pause or changing of context, indicating a change in context or a change in subject from A to B or an objective from A to B. Similar to chapters in a book, The paragraphs can be either in continuation or independent of each other, as the case may be or as the requirement may be. Ideally, for English, Hindi and other language texts, a paragraph in case of news should be of 50 words or so, comprising 2 or at the most 4 sentences. So, a sub-editor should always try to restrict the context to 1 or 2 paragraphs at a time, then move on to the next paragraph with the next leg of information or the next context. Paragraphs should also occur when there is a gap or pause in narration, there is a changeover in context, or there is a change in sourcing, indicating that the subsequent paragraph comes from a different source. A big story or a big paragraph should be broken into smaller paragraphs, and long sentences should be broken into short sentences. So, in the standard format of a story, the intro, the description and the conclusion, the 3 parts, the number of paragraphs should be 1 for the intro, and for description could be 2, 3, 4, 5 and 1 for the conclusion. To indicate a pause or break or change in context and to break monotony, subheadings are often used. These are different from a headline, as these are used within the story and not on top of it. Subheadings are generally of a very abstract nature, not very indicative, and more often a word or 2 is simply picked up from the subsequent text to form a subheading. A newspaper can include news till one point only and no further. As soon as this point of time is decided or reached, it becomes absolutely essential to include all aspects of the chosen item in the final page, and this is where the work of the sub-editor becomes crucial and final. We also remember that the flow of news to a newspaper office is round the clock and generally uninterrupted. This means that at any given point of time, the very first, later and latest versions of events making news are available, and a sub-editor must make sure that nothing is missed, as also nothing extra is used. This also means that there should be no hiccups or jarring notes in the final item, which should in one read tell the reader what actually happened and in which order. So, the task of ensuring continuity is basically an exercise requiring assimilation of available information, its proper comprehension by the sub-editor, and the simultaneous forming of sentences and phrases, so that all available bits of information get joined into one cohesive piece of news. So, if proper continuity is introduced and maintained in any news item, the item will also qualify to be used as an individual and independent component. So, the item, as the case may be, should tell the readers a story in itself, in the right order of time, in the right order of events as they happened, and in a language that does not lead to confusion, that does not make the reader guess as to what could have happened, and as far as possible answering all the questions that may come out from that piece of news. As we have seen here the example of a train accident, one can also imagine the kind of information flood which happens in a newsroom in the event of an election or a continuous process conference or a session in parliament or a voting in case of an assembly or Lok Sabha and so on, or anything which is happening throughout the day with no specific conclusion in sight. One can imagine that the sub-editors during those days are a harried lot, but at the end of the day, in the night when the pages are being prepared to be released, it is the ability of a good and competent sub-editor that will ensure that the chaos and the hectic activity of news input throughout the day till late in the evening or night results in one comprehensive, complete item, so that the reader who reads it in the morning actually believes that he has missed out on nothing. With this, we end this discussion on editing and the techniques involved in this exercise. We shall take up further aspects of editing in our next discussion. Till then, my best wishes and thank you.